Coketown was a town of red brick, a town of machinery and tall chimneys. It had a black canal and a river that ran purple with ill-smelling dye. It contained many streets very like one another, inhabited by people equally like one another, to whom every day was the same as yesterday and tomorrow, and every year the counterpart of the last and the next.
Thomas Gradgrind, sir, a man of realities. Now, what I want is facts. Teach these boys and girls nothing but facts. This is the principle on which I bring up my own children. Stick to facts. Girl, number 20. I don't know that girl. Who is that girl?
Father calls me Sissy, sir, returned the young girl in a trembling voice and with a curtsy.
Cecilia Jupe. Let me see. What is your father?
He belongs to the horse riding, if you please, sir.
Very well, then. He is a farrier and horsebreaker. Give me your definition of a horse.
Sissy Jupe was thrown into the greatest alarm by this demand.
Girl number 20, unable to define a horse. Bitzer, your definition of a horse. Quadruped, graminivorous, 40 teeth, namely 24 grinders, 4 eye teeth and 12 incisive. Hoofs hard, but requiring to be shod with iron. Age known by marks in mouth. You are in all things to be regulated and governed by fact. This is the new discovery. This is taste. This is fact.
The girl curtsied and sat down. She was very young, and she looked as if she were frightened by the matter-of-fact prospect the world afforded. Mr. Gradgrind walked homeward from the school in a state of considerable satisfaction. It was his school, and he intended every child in it to be a model, just as the young Gradgrinds were all models. He had reached the neutral ground upon the outskirts of the town when his ears were invaded by the sound of clashing and banging. It was a band attached to a horse-riding establishment which had set up in a wooden pavilion. At the back of the booth, a number of children were striving to peep in at the hidden glories of the place. This brought him to a stop.
Now, to think of those vagabonds attracting the young rabble from a model school.
He took his eyeglass out of his waistcoat to look for any child he knew by name and might order off. What did he then behold but his own metallurgical daughter, Louisa, peeping with all her might, and his own mathematical Thomas abasing himself on the ground to catch but a hoof of the graceful equestrian Tyrolean flower act.
In the name of wonder, idleness and folly, what do you do here?
I wanted to see what it was like, returned Louisa shortly. She was a child now of 15 or 16, but at no distant day would seem to become a woman all at once.
Thomas, though I have the facts before me, I find it difficult to believe that you, with your educational resources, should have brought your sister to a scene like this.
I brought him, father, said Louisa quickly. I asked him to come.
Say not another word, I will hear no more.
He did not speak again until they had walked some half a mile in silence.
What would your best friend say, Louisa? What would Mr. Bounderby say?
At the mention of this name, his daughter stole a look at him, remarkable for its intense and searching character. All the way to Stone Lodge, as with grave indignation he led the two delinquents home, he repeated at intervals,
What would Mr. Bounderby say?
Mr. Bounderby was as near being Mr. Gradgrind's bosom friend as a man perfectly devoid of sentiment can approach. He was a rich man, banker, merchant, manufacturer and what-not, a big loud man with a stare and a metallic laugh, a self-made man. A man who was always proclaiming through a brassy speaking trumpet of a voice of his ignorance and poverty. A man who was the bully of humility. In the formal drawing-room of Stone Lodge, standing on the hearthrug and warming himself before the fire, Mr. Bounderby delivered some observations to Mrs. Gradgrind on the circumstance of its being his birthday.
Well, I hadn't a shoe to me foot. As to a stocking, I didn't know such a thing by name. I passed the day in a ditch and the night in a pigsty. That's the way I spent my 10th birthday.
Mrs. Gradgrind, a little thin bundle of shawls, hoped it was a dry ditch.
No, as wet as a sop, a foot of water in it,
said Mr. Bounderby. Mrs. Gradgrind, meekly and weakly, hoped that his mother...
My mother bolted, ma'am, said Bounderby.
Mrs. Gradgrind, stunned as usual, gave up the conversation, and arriving at this climax, Josiah Bounderby of Coketown stopped, just as his eminently practical friend, still accompanied by the two young culprits, entered the room.
Well,
blustered Bounderby.
What's matter? What is young Thomas in the dumps about?
He spoke of young Thomas, but looked at Louisa. We were peeping at the circus, muttered Louisa haughtily without lifting up her eyes, and father caught us.
Oh, go and be something illogical directly.
Mrs. Gradgrind was not a scientific character, and usually dismissed her children with this general injunction.
Bounderby, you're always so interested in my young people, well, particularly in Louisa, that I make no apology for saying to you, in what has this vulgar curiosity its rise? Oh, I'll tell you what, in idle imagination, a very bad thing for anyone, but a cursed bad thing for a girl like Louisa. Can, said Mr. Gradgrind, pondering with his hands in his pockets and his cavernous eyes on the fire, can any instructor or servant have suggested anything? Have Louisa or Thomas been reading anything? Now, stop a bit, cried Bounderby, bursting at the very furniture of the room with explosive humility. You have one of those strollers' children in the school. Cecilia Jupe, by name, said Mr. Gradgrind, with something of a stricken look at his friend. Now, I'll tell you what, Gradgrind, said Mr. Bounderby. Turn this girl to the right about, there's an end of it, and do it at once. I have the father's address. Perhaps you would not mind walking to town with me. Not in the least, said Mr. Bounderby, as long as we do it at once.